introduce our lovely colleagues at the University of Denver. Ellen Hogan, who is the faculty developer of instructional accessibility, and Leslie Cramblett Alvarez, who is the assistant vice provost and director of the Office of Teaching and Learning at the University of Denver. They're going to be giving us this wonderful workshop on cultivating cultures of support for neurodiverse students. And I'll let y'all take it away.
Thank you. So we're very excited to be here today. Thank you, Kendall, for the introduction. As Kendall shared, my name is Ellen Hogan. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a faculty developer in the Office of Teaching and Learning at the University of Denver. A lot of my role is working with one-on-one faculty or in cohorts of faculty to design instructional experiences with accessibility in mind from the beginning. And I'm excited to share more about my role with you all today. Leslie?
Hi, everyone. Leslie Cramblett Alvarez. I'm the Assistant Vice Provost and the Director of the Office of Teaching and Learning here at DU, and I have the great pleasure of getting to work with Ellen. We'll tell you a little bit about the history of this institute, but I've been involved with it since the beginning. As a CTL, or Center for Teaching and Learning Director, part of my role is kind of staying on top of the things that are impacting students and faculty and being responsive to those needs and developing programs in partnership with other offices when the opportunities arise. I want to thank Susanna McGowan for inviting us, and also the support of Aranza Obscura and Kendall Bryant. We are excited to share a version with you of what we talked to some folks about at AAC&U this year, and we're excited to continue this conversation in ways that are helpful for you as you move your projects forward. So just a little bit about our location. We're in Denver, Colorado. We are a private university, recently minted Research One institution. And we have about 12,000 graduates and undergraduates. It's interesting because we've got about half and half at University of Denver across 10 schools and colleges. And we have greater than 800 appointed faculty. I think we have about 1,300 adjuncts. And so our office is what you might at your institution call a center for teaching and learning. And we are tasked with both pedagogical and technological support. We oversee the LMS. We are housed in faculty affairs at some institutions. It may be directly under the provost or with academic affairs. And we're a fairly mature center of teaching and learning. We've been on campus for 25 years, and we have in the neighborhood of 10 full-time staff. So we do have more capacity than some centers for teaching and learning do, but we are sort of in a place where we support the entire campus, even though there may be instructional designers or faculty developers and housed in certain departments. Our task is serving the entire institution. And so moving on to what we hope to do with you today. We do understand that not all of the schools here have a specific focus on serving neurodiverse students. I do think we fit in really well with today's provocateur and thinking about leading with love and how do we care for our students and how do we care for all aspects of their identity. So I'll let Ellen go over the session outcomes, but suffice it to say, we hope that even if you're not focusing on neurodiverse students, that maybe you can find something transferable about our approach to campus-wide change and the ways in which we engaged with campus partners. And that you might be inspired to think about neurodiversity as one of the intersectional identities of the students that you are aiming your projects as. For example, first-generation students, or if you're thinking about achievement or graduation gaps, and inclusion and diversity broadly. So Ellen, would you like to go over real quickly our outcomes?
Absolutely. So by the end of today's sessions, we hope that you, as Leslie mentioned, identify intersections of neurodiversity on your student success projects and potential benefits of creating some type of university-wide education on accessibility, universal design for learning, and neurodiversity. We hope that you'll consider strategies for fostering faculty development and implementing strategic changes to promote these specific topics, or as Leslie mentioned, transferring the type of institute that we created and the ways that we facilitated change, how that could be brought into your own faculty development work. And then leave with some practical ideas and actionable steps to initiate or enhance educational campaigns. Again, whether focus on these topics of accessibility, universal design for learning, and neurodiversity, or your own student success project. To get us started, we wanted to kind of survey the room a bit and see where you all are at entering this conversation. I will say that I think neurodiversity is a term that might be new to some folks. And so just to define that, we at DU define it as a term that is acknowledging the natural differences in brain function and behavioral traits among our students, among all humans. Individuals who identify as neurodiverse may have a diagnosis, they may not. Some common diagnoses might be autism spectrum disorders, attention deficit hyperactivity disorders, dyslexia, or any other type of learning difference. And so if you don't mind, in the chat, if we could get some participation from the folks on the call today. We wanted to ask, when it comes to supporting neurodiverse students, how would you rate your institution? 0 being maybe we haven't approached this yet. There's not really an organized support for neurodiverse students. 1 might be we have siloed, disjointed approaches. Maybe you have one office or a disability services type office dedicated to supporting these students. 2, you know who your partners are and there are efforts to be organized. Or 3, perhaps you're reaching towards this robust support that is coordinated across offices and departments.
And I love Chelsea's 1.5. That is definitely allowed. So
yeah.
Are you on the barren plains or are you navigating the windy roads?
Awesome. We have some 2s and 1s. Just a couple more seconds. I will say for us at the University of Denver, we've been kind of at this now for about 3.5 years. And so we were definitely in the 1.5 area for a while there. And I think we're finally saying we are closer to the 2 and 3. So we hope that this presentation might inspire you to think about how you can move that target. 1.5, 1 person who does an amazing job collaborating. Wonderful. Thank you all for sharing and participating to get us started. Pass it back to you, Leslie.
Yeah, so a little bit of background here. You know, the central need was the robust support, right? Coordinated across offices and departments. And we realized that this was, and of course, we're an Office of Teaching and Learning, faculty development support was needed. But to zoom out a little bit, I'll share, starting on the left, our student population. You may or may not know what this looks like at your own institution, but we do know that about 1 in 5 of our students are registered with Student Disability Services, and that's probably an underestimate of the students who have documented disabilities, and that is an underestimate of the students who are actually might identify as neurodiverse. We also have some strong student advocacy on our campus. There's a neurodiverse student group that is very vocal. And related to that, there are campus programs that also draw those students to DU. In addition to our Student Disability Support Services, we have what is called the Learning Effectiveness Program, which is a fee-based program, although they do provide lots of scholarships. And their mission is to support learning and neurodiversity. And they're essentially case management for students with neurodiversity. They have tutors. They meet the students that are in this paid program, meet with folks regularly. They get a lot of additional support and help navigating the university. So you don't have to have a documented disability to be in this program. You just have to identify as neurodiverse. And because we have this longstanding successful program that's been on our campus for 40 years, it attracts a lot of neurodiverse students and a lot of students with documented disabilities. Then, as we all are remember, the pandemic struck. And for some neurodiverse students, they really thrived in online environments. We did not have a strong history of successful adoption of our LMS. So it was a learning curve for many of our faculty to wade into the online space. But it also exacerbated some barriers for neurodiverse students. So we saw increasing needs around the pandemic, and we also realized where our own accessibility gaps were, both as an institution and within the classroom. And so faculty were telling us through our internal surveys and also our conversations with faculty that they wanted greater support responding to student accommodations in the classroom. So that sort of laid the foundation for us engaging in some change. So we can go to the next slide. You may or may not know this about Centers for Teaching and Learning, but there's increasing involvement at CTLs, of CTLs at the institutional level when it comes to change that's in the domain of teaching and learning. And so it's important to us to think about our role as a lever of change. So we are guided by organizational change theory as we think about how we help faculty make sense of the emerging needs in the classrooms and evaluating their prior knowledge. There's still a lot of mythology among university faculty that accommodations are making it easier for certain students or that they are compromising on rigor. So we realized that we needed to do some foundational work. We needed to help people understand what the needs of neurodiverse students are in the classroom and develop buy-in, leaning into human relationships for deeper change. We've been very inspired by the work about relentless welcome at our own institution, which Mary Danahan referred to as well. We wanted to create a coalition to mobilize change using our ability to lead from the center as a CTL. And just wondering if any of you care to share in the chat, are any of you working with your Center for Teaching and Learning? Do you know the folks that are involved? So as your projects intersect with faculty and faculty support, are you already partnering with some of your CTLs or similar groups on campus? And while you're percolating on that, I'll let Ellen go ahead and go to the next slide. But I do want to put in a plug that when we think about partners, if you aren't thinking about your CTL as a partner, it may be one that has a lot of campus reach and certainly reach with the faculty.
Yes, and I want to nod to the OSU's comment in the chat of they have a robust office that provides support, but the institutional approach is more about compliance than proactive. We kind of find ourselves in that same hole of when we have maybe perhaps things, people either resisting to change or are kind of on that growing edge, that once the student with an accommodation comes in, now it is a compliance conversation. And our goal really in this institute is to get faculty owning and feeling confident in proactive approaches that can systemically dismantle barriers for all students in their classroom, regardless of an identified documented accommodation or not. We also know that oftentimes there are students who, as Leslie mentioned, aren't having accommodation. And so there are ways that just accessibility in general can support a magnitude of students, not just your students with disabilities, but definitely centering their needs is a great place to start. So we often actually look at these campus partners as a way for us to continue to foster change by thinking about things like the common accommodations that students are approved. Maybe there's ways that we could just not need to ask for a peer note taker for a student with disabilities, and instead we create a peer note taking network in our class that all students can benefit from this idea of collective shared notes. So we'll definitely have more time to talk more specifics, but our campus partners, we look at that learning effectiveness program, which Leslie mentioned, is the paid for program that is responsible for supporting neurodiverse students registered with them. They also are, as OSU mentioned, a robust office that definitely provides supports for these students. And they're working very tirelessly, I think, to create systemic change out of student affairs, especially. They kind of have taken on this leadership of driving the community into this more accessible universal design space. And they're our key partner in our institute. We like to bring in people who are working with students face-to-face on a regular basis to share that insight with our faculty and to close that gap for them. Obviously, us as our key partner here, we are responsible for faculty development and sharing these inclusive teaching practices. So it makes sense of us being that proactive support on campus. We often will say we're not the compliance office. We're trying to actually alleviate that from our faculty, that they feel that they can go into the next term knowing that they have their accommodations understood, and have actually done everything they can to make it as a minimal of a barrier space as possible. So obviously faculty are another key partners responsible for the classroom experiences and those individual student accommodations. And then we have our student disability support office, which all campuses have some type of disability support for students. And they're responsible for the legal compliance space of accommodation. So they're a key partner in this work, but we actually don't spend a lot of time talking about individual accommodations in this space because we don't want faculty entering the conversation with deficit mindset or thinking about just the way that they're going to address that one student in that one accommodation, but instead acknowledging where they can make a big difference for a lot of different students. So jumping in, we wanted to kind of give you all a space to pause and kind of reflect on what we shared so far. So I'm going to add in the chat as well as these questions, because we're going to put you all in a breakout room where we hope for you to discuss the following, thinking about in what ways did the pandemic raise issues for neurodiverse students at your university, if this was a topic or an issue at all. Facing forward, what sort of buy-in or partners would you need to create such change at your university? What would it mean to cultivate a culture of support for neurodiverse students at your institution? And then perhaps bringing it back to your success projects, how does neurodiversity intersect with that population of students that you're targeting?
So I think we'll take about 5 minutes for you all to discuss and then bring back for a little sharing out. So thanks to our friends at the Opportunity Institute for setting up breakout rooms. All right, well, we'll move on. We do have one more breakout at the end. We'll be sure to let you have a little more time to think and respond.
So we mentioned, and maybe again, this is where you're thinking about your student success project of how you're centering identity in that space. And we did want to share just a strategy that we used during our Neurodiversity Institute. On the first day when we do our welcome activity, we really want to ground folks in on thinking about intersectional identities. And so we cut out on the right side of the screen, we're showing examples of the cards that we use, and we turn them into traditional playing cards where there's the ability to shuffle the cards and kind of organize them in ways that make sense to the participants. Topics such as race, ethnicity, the socioeconomic class, gender identity, sexual orientation, immigrant status, ability, disability, religion. The neurotypicality we slip in there to have folks kind of think about where they might be prioritizing and or maybe not thinking about neurotypicality or neurodiversity, and then age. So we asked them then, after they spend some time shuffling through these cards, to imagine if they could rewind time and start college again. What would the order of their cards change? Would they stay the same? And I think it brings people kind of into a different space. Oftentimes, we'll have some faculty shuffle ability or disability to the front of their deck, perhaps because of an experience they've had personally with their own family or their own children or students. And really the point of this is to get them focused on the idea that ability and disability is a social identity. And where is that card in their hand currently? Where would that card maybe have been if they had ordered it as a new college student? So this is just an idea of sharing with you all an activity we've done with the Institute that really allows us to center in identity and how our students come to classroom carrying all these different cards, and keeping that in mind when we're designing things like student success projects or just our typical 10-week term here at DU. How can they be aware and cognizant of these different identities that they're bringing into the classroom? So we often talk about this as a campaign across our campus. And so as we think about this, I hope that you can kind of apply them into different campaigns that you might be considering starting at your campus. Perhaps it's a neurodiversity focused campaign, or maybe it's something aligned with another strategic plan that you have currently in your student success project. So we often look at faculty recruitment. We've done this institute about 5 times now. And so when we think about it, we like to think about referrals. So having chairs or deans kind of refer people to us that have, this might be on a learning curve for them. And I think it coming from different parts of their department allows us to kind of have more validity in the invite. We've done invites, targeted invites to people that we know have an interest in learning about neurodiversity. And then recently we turned it into an open call process because it turned into this ripple where one faculty from a department attended the institute and then referred other people to us. And so we wanted to make it an open call to encourage other people who maybe are interested but didn't get invited or referred to us specifically. We do a 2-day program, so it's 2 full days in person. We do require attendance, and we ask faculty to really be present with us in that time. And so it is kind of part of our decision making of how many of the faculty are going to participate. It's often around 20, and they're from all over campus, so all 10 departments are typically represented. We do have a faculty stipend where we are providing financial incentives for attending, and then they get half for attending and half for doing the deliverable project. We look at the Universal Design for Learning framework. Again, we kind of focus on this idea of accessibility over accommodations, and we spend more of our time talking about ways that they can dismantle barriers for students as opposed to getting fixated on the specific accommodation. We think about capacity building. We talk about this a lot. We want our faculty to know where their resources are, to know the local experts, to think about engaging with student voice. And then we do an applicable practice through student scenarios that we've written with students and with those staff from the Learning Effectiveness Program to really elevate the student voice. Our big takeaway is that we want to create change agents by opening hearts and minds. So we have a deliverable assignment that is due 3 months post-institute. In the essence of Universal Design for Learning, it's really flexible of what the faculty are encouraged to do. They often have a 2-hour reflection of their own, and then they have changes inside of their class to make. And then this bigger outcome of institutional change by their department.
And before we move on, just one thing to share, the faculty recruitment that Ellen mentioned, it was nominations through deans and associate deans. And we asked specifically for people who are positioned to be champions, positioned to make change, teaching large classes, for example, and people for whom it might be a growing edge. And because the nomination came from an academic leader in their area, it created this perceived prestige of being invited to this Neurodiversity Institute. So people were clamoring to attend, and it's only just become an open call. The opening hearts and minds piece were the words of some parents whose student faced struggles specifically during the pandemic. And they offered the financial incentive that allowed us to create faculty stipends. So I do want to say this is not cost neutral, right? We're incentivizing the change. It's also done during the summer primarily, or at least that's how it started, so that faculty were off contract and they felt like they were being compensated for their time. The parents who provided the donation said, we just think that some of the faculty just don't get it. And we just want to open their hearts and minds to understanding what it means to be a neurodiverse student in the higher education classroom. So again, it really resonated with me when I was hearing Mary Dana Hinton's talk today about leading with love, because if we can just relationally open people's hearts and minds to the sorts of experiences these students are happening, it can reverberate through all sorts of different levels of change. And that was really important to us, that it was not one and done. So Ellen will share on the next slide a little bit more about the deliverables and how we intentionally built this for sustained change.
So our outcomes, again, kind of fostering this shared language has been a really helpful, though self-reported data for us from our participants. It's been really, I think, enjoyable to watch faculty leave the Institute feeling like they know how to use the terminology. So one of our outcomes is this idea of being able to explain the following terms to a colleague: neurodiversity, universal design for learning, and accessibility. Then our next outcome is for them to think about their classroom practices. So applying these universal design for learning principles to their course experience and designing responsive and proactive structures to support and collaborate with students. I think that's when we spend a lot of time really flipping the script on these common accommodations. We recognize that there are some spaces in some programming where an accommodation is necessary to level the playing field for the students. But there might be other types of structures that are being set up in our classroom just because it's always been that way. For example, there's been conversation around like the timed assessment. Do we have to give the time assessment depending on the practice and the purpose of the assessment? Maybe you don't need to worry about adding extra time. And so we like to think about how they can look at the structures in their classroom and be as proactive so that when a student comes with an accommodation, they can say, oh, you need captions? I've already captioned our videos. Everybody gets captions in my class. And then it kind of transforms into this departmental effort. So it's a three-pronged deliverable assignment that they need to do some further research on those terms, and finding even perhaps some scholarship of teaching and learning that aligns with their field that focuses on supporting students with disabilities or students who identify as neurodiverse. Then they need to bring it into their classroom and actually try something. We really encourage that power of play. Just try one new thing, and let us know how it goes. We'll follow up with you in 3 months. And then this departmental effort is that they need to advocate for student needs regarding neurodiversity within their school program, department, or unit. And we've seen some really awesome evidence of change where it's a whole department has gone through the Institute and then they changed their mission statement to include the word accessibility. Or we have different little mini community of practices popping up of people who are trying new things. Like our language department, they're trying to create some more scaffolded supports for their students. And that really is evolved because of their time spent at the Institute with us. So at the end, we do have them self-report out, where we look at those major terms and we see growth. So they shared with us that they grew significantly in all neurodiversity, universal design for learning, and accessibility. And again, though it's self-reported, I think for us in Centers for Teaching and Learning, it's a space where we can say there's some proof in the pudding here that people learned and were able to apply the knowledge.
So we've tried for our own program evaluation purposes to gather some quantitative and qualitative data. This is hot off the press. We did a ripple effects mapping session and we invited all of our past participants over several years. We're really trying to re-engage past cohorts so that we can sustain this group of people who are UDL and neurodiversity advocates. This doesn't capture everyone, but we had about 20 people in this ripple effects mapping session. And ripple effects mapping is a qualitative program evaluation methodology in which people respond to appreciative inquiry style questions. And they were asked to talk about the impact of the Neurodiversity Institute changes that they've made. What are the best parts of it? Those sorts of things. And in real time, a concept map of sorts is being generated. And the goal of ripple effects mapping is to try to uncover both the intended and unintended impacts of a program. Our friends in social work are the experts in this approach, and we asked them to come and do it with us. And we'll share a little bit about what the participants told us. The final product is using, I can't remember the name of the software, but using a mapping software. And we had 5 main themes come out of what are the best parts of this institute, what are the impacts of this institute, and mirroring our quantitative data, applying these practices and understanding these terms. There were changes that were made to the classroom, and people thought deeply about what they could do differently as a result. Also on the left, student learning and advocacy. They talked about the ways that they were able to impact student experience. They talked about what they knew about neurodiversity. They made curricular changes, and they implemented new practices in the classroom. There was an impact on participants personally and professionally. Their knowledge and confidence around neurodiversity was increased. The foundational knowledge, knowing the terminology, it helped ripple across campus in terms of people knowing what these terms meant and why it was important, and also UDL and why that's important. And spaces of support and community. One of our goals as a Center for Teaching and Learning is connecting faculty across different departments. And the participants really noted that it was a space of support and community. And it was a space of support and community for faculty who were neurodiverse. And we actually have one of our new favorite faculty members who identified that he is actually on the autism spectrum and never been diagnosed, but realized through the Institute that he was neurodiverse too, and is now a huge advocate for students in STEM, and has really transformed his classroom and his department, and found connection with our office and other folks who care very deeply about this work, which he hadn't necessarily been experiencing in his department. And so the next couple of slides just are unreadable, but we want to share just to show you what a ripple effects map looks like. So applying NDI practices came from things like collaboration, teaching practice, assessing student needs, and further applications. And these were what you see in the lighter colored boxes were some of the quotes and some of the themes that came from the participant responses. So each one of these overarching themes were fed through other parts of the conversation. So we'll pass through those other slides that unpack this a little bit more, but just to let you know that there's some really amazing direct quotes that came from this that led up to these overarching themes. Ellen, would you like to share anything more about the ripple effects mapping before we move on?
I think a big takeaway that I'm even just now reflecting on, Leslie, is this idea of assessing student needs. I think that was something that prior to the Institute, an overwhelming amount of faculty felt like there was this kind of miscommunication or misunderstanding of why students were sending accommodations and why they needed certain adjustments to the classroom practices. And though we obviously encourage faculty that they're not going to go up to a student and ask if they are disabled, but that there are certain questions that you can cater to asking to all students in your classroom, that again kind of gets you ahead of their needs. And so we developed this resource, and I can share it in the chat as well, called an accessibility survey, that some faculty from the Institute have taken us up on to send before the quarter starts, or maybe just after that first week, to ask some really probing questions more generally around their access needs to the class. So things like technology supports in the classroom, or even the idea of dimming lights for students during class time, or providing quiet test-taking environments for everyone, or just extra test-taking time for everyone. So there was a lot, I think, that came out of this idea of just surveying the students, and using that data to make decisions in the classroom for that specific cohort. Mm-hmm. So I think I kind of started to hit on this, and I apologize, I kind of messed my slides into two. The reflective growth, again, is this idea that this isn't just a 2-day workshop that faculty come to and then they're kind of just on their merry way again. We wanted to create a process of change that gave some of this accountability back on the faculty, that once you've done this Institute, there are going to be things now that we hope that you bring through as you grow professionally, and that we'll be following back up on in 3 months to ensure that there's been some change. and some deeper reflection and research. So again, we do ask them to design a plan that includes at least 2 hours of research or engaged learning on the topic. It helps us in the Center for Teaching and Learning. And so that's a key partner that you're thinking of right now. It engages more faculty with us because they're going to either come and attend one of our workshops like this UDL Your Course series that I designed. They might read a recommended book that we've given them from the book list. Maybe they'll schedule a course review with an OTL instructional designer to kind of really dive into the digital accessibility of things. From there, then they design a plan for how they will apply the work to their classroom. We've seen things like centering digital accessibility, as I mentioned, redesigning their assessment using more flexibility and choice, or implementing that accessibility survey that I shared to make changes based on the student feedback. And then for their engaging their department or strategic change, they might design a plan. We did have some administrators come through where it really then was elevated into the departmental efforts because they designed a plan and aligned it to their strategic changes. We've seen people bring colleagues into the OTL. So that's again where it's creating this more of a ripple effect and really sharing more with the greater community or going public with that. Facilitating a department discussion on accessibility. So there's been a couple of times that we've been tapped on to come support departmental meetings where they're talking more broadly about their experience with the Institute, or perhaps convening a book club or really more intentionally a community of practice around the topic. So I think I can go quickly through this, Leslie, so that we can have some more time with folks, if that's okay. So some of the deliverables that we saw for reflective growth, as I mentioned, they did things like additional readings and discussions, focused on disability justice or academic ableism. There was course reviews done, so participating in course reviews with a UDL expert and giving some very individualized tips and suggestions to change. Leslie mentioned one of our faculty who has really started to be a big champion for this. He actually just got approved for grant funding to study neurodiversity in chemistry classes. So if that has any interest in anyone, he's looking to just grow the advocacy for neurodiversity in the STEM field. And then again, OTL workshops. So we saw an increase with people who attended and referring people to our workshops, which it just helps the overall institutional change and engagement. The course development, we saw things like that accessibility survey that I mentioned. We did purchase an accessibility checker for our learning management system. We are a Canvas school, so we use CityLabs as our plugin to enhance the features of some of the Canvas courses. And one of their tools is called UDoIT, which stands for the Universal Design Online Inspection Tool. Sometimes when we start this work, I think thinking about digital accessibility kind of in that center area allows for people to really understand some of the barriers that students have. At DU, a big one is our use of scanned PDFs and how that's not really friendly to people who need to use a text-to-speech software, which then burdens our disability services office. So we like to think about encouraging faculty to replace those scans or use this accessibility checker to at least flag the ones that they need to remediate. And again, that just benefits all students to be able to use the assistive technologies to access the content. We saw things like changes to the course design or syllabus. We had one faculty in our writing program design her whole course around UDL, so the students even knew why she was doing what she was doing, which I thought was really empowering for that student-faculty relationship. And then we saw changes to activities or assessment. So using UDL frameworks and the student feedback to actually make changes and kind of question and interrogate their own activities and assessment and why they do them in class. So a lot of positive, I think, in the course development. And then for this, again, these changes to the department, we saw things like instructional accessibility support being developed. So we really like the train the trainer model here at DU, or the more people we can train in the departments, the more we're going to hopefully meet our own goals. And so we've had a couple of faculty who've had more of a leadership role in their departments actually create a support internally, like hiring and training graduate students to remediate those PDFs, or to run course reviews and give tips on how they can better use UDL models in their classroom. We've seen a lot of ongoing training and student partnerships. So because of this institute, I think faculty, it allowed these specific student groups to be put on the faculty's radar. And so from there, we saw them bringing students into department trainings, facilitating student panels, or creating a really intentional student-faculty partnership at the department level. We've seen an increase in inclusion of UDL in course proposals. So and I think that's really the best time to get to faculty is when they're designing the course experiences. And that's where some of these can be infused into their already developed plan. But it's nice to see that becoming a part of not only the proposals, but also teacher evaluations. I know our College of Education, they're kind of looking at their teacher evaluations and interrogating where is inclusive teaching and where is universally designed coming up in that reward structure for faculty. Which I truly believe is where we would have the biggest impact of change is that people get credit for doing this work. Oftentimes the universal design for learning is looked at as like extra work by faculty. And I like to kind of rewrite that script along the lines of, if we do the work now, it's going to be smooth sailing for you and your students. And you won't have to stop to support that one student because you've thought intentionally about student needs. And then, as I mentioned, there's been changes to values and missions, using words like inclusivity and accessibility added to their department program values or their mission statements.
The other thing that was important about this was elevating it beyond the responsibility of the individual faculty member, which is sort of the compliance model. And we had lots of frightened faculty that thought that they would be personally sued if something went wrong. And so there was a lot of anxiety around accessibility. So changing the conversation to universal design in the classroom and also elevating the discussion to the department level of how are we navigating this as a department? How are our department leaders prioritizing UDL? And how are they supporting the faculty for the cases that do rise to the level of student disability support when it's remediation that's beyond the skill set that is a reasonable expectation for the faculty member. So we wanted to make sure that these conversations were happening at the department and unit level.
I guess we have more questions for you all, but I also kind of want to open it up if there's any questions about what we've talked about or shared so far with you all.
You want to put it in the chat or send it to me privately? Either way is cool. And I will be willing to share out. So
thank you, Kendall.
Of course.
So as you might be thinking about a question or a response, Ellen and I developed what we thought might be 4 possible takeaways, knowing that neurodiversity might intersect with your project, but isn't necessarily the focus of your project. We thought that campus-wide faculty development, including neurodiverse voices, sustainable change at multiple institutional levels, and engaging with partners might be some things to take away from this. But we also realize that there may be other things that you're taking away. And we want this to be a useful discussion for all of you. So we'll prompt you with these questions in the breakout in a moment. But the question in the chat for Ellen, how did you get people to let go of PDFs?
Thank you, Penn State. I don't think I think we're still a work in progress. I will say one of the sessions during the Institute, and we'd be happy to share, anyone who has follow-ups, we'd be happy to share like our schedule that we run on these 2 days and kind of how we've designed it. But one of them is on digital accessibility. And I bring them through what it looks like to have a poor quality PDF scan. I hope that maybe this is resonating with more than just Penn State of the type of instructional materials that faculty choose to use. We have some departments that they're only allowed to use remediated high quality PDFs as like a departmental wide practice. And that's kind of where that change is really important, because I think the other side of that pendulum is that I have some departments that the faculty are on their own. They are procuring content on their own terms. And so, especially during the pandemic, we had people like taking pictures of their PDFs like on their coffee table. And that's not accessible for students with screen readers or text-to-speech softwares. So I think it's been kind of a show and tell experience for me, but those are the folks I really get bought in, is that I'll say things like, if you can't control find, if you can't copy and paste from a document in 2024, like that is not an accessible PDF, and it's not really helpful for any of your students. Students being able to search using technology to search for keywords is going to be really a great access for every student in the class. And so, and just how much of a cohesive learning experience students can have if they can listen to the reading, if they can highlight, if they can mark up the text. So I don't have a complete answer. I don't think I've gotten everybody to let go, but the believers who see that it's beneficial, and just visually, it's easier for folks who are accessing it visually. It's easier to read. Or sometimes I'll go the other route and tell them of stories where a student with low vision or blindness does enroll in the class. Now we're on fire to finish this and to get this done in the 10 weeks at the same time as their peers. So sometimes that also puts some, I think, encouragement in them of like, let me replace these, and I'll take faculty through, like, if we can find it on our library website, let's download that version or use that version over the one you're carrying from your grad school experiences. Or if we need to get to the technical space, we can coach you on how to remediate a PDF so that it's as accessible as it can be. Thank you for your question. I appreciate it. All right, Leslie, well, it's 11:38. I can put these questions in the chat if we want to go through them really quick.
No.
So we're gonna, I think, what's a good number?
Let's come back at 11:50 our time. So 50 after the hour. So we'll give you a nice long break to discuss and think, and then wrap up together.
So I put in the chat just kind of code to guide you, and you could pick whichever question or pose a different one for your group. Perhaps what pieces of our model might you take and replicate? Maybe you're thinking about how you will invite neurodiverse voices into your student success project or campaign planning. Maybe you're thinking about the goals at the more micro, meso, and macro levels of change, or incentivizing and maintaining it. And what partners do you have, and who are you missing at this point?
Breakouts are opening right now.
Thank you, Kendall.
All right. So with attrition, we have OSU. Would you all care to share what came out of your discussion? Oh, and Penn State. Yay. All right. Looks like everybody's back in. Would anyone like to, Ellen, if we go back to the previous slide, if anybody would like to put into the chat or share a takeaway or a question?
One of the things that I had mentioned and just processing through this is as we're thinking about neurodiverse students, and a lot of the recommendations and thoughts is that really also, if you take it a step further, as a culture where we're at, like in our world, in our modern world with, attention spans and constant scrolling and instant gratification and all of that, When you were talking about, oftentimes these adaptations or suggestions for improvement don't just benefit a few students, they benefit all of us. That kind of resonated, like a lot of the things that we're seeing, even students that aren't necessarily neurodiverse might have these challenges, just because of, they were 6 when they got their first cell phone. So just being able to be mindful of the way the culture and the world is shifting, I think also just in general will make us more prone to be more aware of ways we can support individuals.
Thank you, Liz. That's really important. And one of the examples that we often use is, how many among us like to use the subtitles when you're even watching Netflix, whether you are experiencing hearing loss or not, right? I mean, these are things that benefit and support all of our learning and understanding, and I think will become increasingly important as time goes by, as you point out. Thank you. All right. Well, thinking about just wrapping up, if anyone would like to share in the chat, you're welcome to do that. Just a couple of next steps for us that we've learned as we've been at this process for a couple of years is that we really want to learn more beyond the ripple effects mapping about how this is impacting the campus as a whole. And through Ellen's leadership in the writing process, we've also been trying to document our work, and we have a forthcoming article. It's a practice brief this fall, we think, in the Journal of Secondary Disability and Secondary Education. And because folks have self-identified as neurodivergent throughout this process, we are engaging in additional support for faculty, having a faculty learning community for neurodiverse faculty, and a community of practice for sustained engagement, because people are really excited about this work and they don't always have colleagues in their departments that share their enthusiasm. We do see really meaningful work when we can get a critical mass of departments on board, but that isn't always the case for all of our participants. And this is an ongoing process. This takes a long time. It's really easy at these sorts of institutes, and when we presented at the AAC&U, to make it look like you've got it all figured out and it was easy, and that it wasn't years of work and building as you're all experiencing with the projects that you're embarking on. It does take a lot of time, and we've been really grateful for our partners across campus, because it takes people from faculty affairs, academic affairs, student affairs to work together on these meaningful changes. And faculty are important partners. And we hope that you'll take away that Center for Teaching and Learning is as well. So Ellen, anything to add, or any other thoughts or reactions from any of you? Well, we hope you have a fantastic time in your work time this afternoon, a very successful Opportunity Institute, and we welcome ongoing engagement. If you feel moved to reach out, we'd love to continue the conversation with you, and wish you the best of luck with your projects.
Thank
Thanks,
you so
everyone.
much. Thank you. You do incredible work. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Jen and Liz.